She sold her innocence not in a whisper of love, not in a moment touched by tenderness, but under the unyielding weight of desperation. To the world it would become a scandal, a whispered tale that travelled from boardrooms to back alleys. But for Serena Carter, it was survival. She was just a girl, a daughter bound to her mother's failing body, buried beneath debts that grew higher than hope could ever climb. The choice had not been a choice at all. It had been the cornering of a soul, the kind of decision one makes when every door has closed, and the only path left leads into darkness. And in that darkness stood a man, Damien Blackwood. He did not smile when the gavel fell, did not gloat when his name rang across the hall. He simply watched her, eyes like shards of winter, a predator who had just claimed his prize. The crowd gasped, the whispers spread, but Serena heard nothing except the pounding of her heart and the echo of her name now tied to his. The auction had begun as a rumor, an ugly joke on an obscure forum, a stage where men with too much money and too little soul came to indulge in the spectacle of owning what should never be owned. She had found it in a haze of late-night despair, when hospital bills loomed like tombstones on her kitchen table, and every call from the doctor felt like a death sentence she could not afford to pay. At first, she laughed at the absurdity of it. Sell your innocence to the highest bidder, let the vultures feast, and walk away with a pile of cash. But as the weeks dragged on, the joke transformed into temptation, and temptation curdled into necessity. Her mother's treatments were slipping out of reach, her job at the gallery paid pennies, and friends who had once promised help fell silent when the numbers grew too large. Survival required sacrifice. She told herself it would be one night, one shame to carry in silence, one choice to save the person she loved most. And so she walked into that glittering hall, trembling beneath cheap perfume and a clearance-rack dress, ready to surrender the last thing she had left. The hall was a world unto itself, dripping with luxury, guarded by men whose suits cost more than her yearly rent. Chandeliers cast cruel light across velvet seats where the bidders reclined, sipping champagne as if they were attending an opera. Their eyes were sharp, hungry, calculating, not for beauty, but for power, for possession. Serena stood behind the curtain, the velvet heavy against her back, trying not to collapse under the weight of her own heartbeat. When the auctioneer called her name, it cracked like thunder through the room. She walked out with her head held high, though her knees threatened to buckle. Every eye followed her, stripping her bare with greed and disdain. She told herself she was no longer a girl in that moment. She was a product, a transaction, a vessel carrying a price tag. The thought should have destroyed her, but she clung to it like armor. The bidding began. Numbers climbed like fire, each one a reminder that her life, her dignity, her future had been reduced to currency. She felt numb, watching the men around her gesture lazily, as if they were bargaining for art or land. Then, when the numbers had reached a crescendo, a silence fell. A figure at the back of the room stood, his presence commanding without effort. The air shifted. Even the most arrogant bidders grew tense, their laughter cut short. Damien Blackwood had arrived. His name was a legend, his reputation a storm. He was the man who built empires from ashes, who destroyed rivals with a single signature. Cold, ruthless, unflinching. To some, he was a monster. To others, a god. To Serena, He was terror incarnate. He raised his hand once. He did not need to raise it again. The gavel fell, and the hall erupted in whispers. Serena's breath caught in her throat. Of all the men in the world, it had to be him. Damien Blackwood was not just rich, not just feared, he was dangerous. Stories clung to him like shadows, corporate betrayals, ruined families, whispers of a past so dark that no one dared to speak it aloud. And now she belonged to him. For a night. For however long he decided. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body was rooted to the stage as he moved toward her. The crowd parted as if sensing the gravity of his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his steps precise, each one carrying the inevitability of a tide. His eyes found hers, and for a heartbeat she felt stripped of everything, as if he could see straight through her bravado to the trembling girl beneath. When he reached her, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low, steady, almost disarmingly calm. Yet beneath it ran a current of power, a tone that demanded obedience. She nodded, unable to find words, her throat dry. He extended a hand, not like a lover offering kindness, but like a conqueror claiming territory. She placed her trembling fingers into his, the contact sending a jolt through her chest. It was done. Her life, her fate, her soul. It had shifted forever. He led her away from the stage, away from the crowd, down a corridor that seemed endless. The walls were lined with mirrors, and she caught glimpses of herself. Her wide eyes, her pale skin, her fragile frame beside his towering figure. She looked like prey walking beside a predator. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. At last, he opened a door, ushering her into a private chamber. The room was stark, modern, drenched in shades of grey and black. It felt less like a place for intimacy, and more like a courtroom where judgment awaited. He closed the door behind them, and she realized she was alone with him, truly alone, cut off from the world. "This was supposed to be simple," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Damien turned, his gaze pinning her like a spear. "Nothing about me is simple," he replied. He moved toward her with the grace of someone who controlled every space he entered, his presence overwhelming, his aura suffocating. She tried to speak, to reclaim some sense of power, but he cut her off with a single sentence that froze her blood. "You think I bought you for a night? You're wrong. I bought you for the truth." Her heart stumbled. The truth. She stared at him, confused, terrified. "I don't understand," she stammered. A faint, cold smile ghosted across his lips. "You will." He studied her as if she were not flesh and bone, but a puzzle he had spent years trying to solve. She wanted to demand answers, but the weight of his gaze silenced her. She felt small, insignificant, yet oddly essential, like a key in a lock she didn't know existed. In that moment, the auction no longer felt like the worst part of her night. Something deeper, darker, had begun. She realized with a sick twist in her stomach that Damien Blackwood had not paid a fortune for a night of pleasure. He had paid for her connection, her blood, her past. Whatever secrets tied their families together, she was now tangled in them. Her life was no longer her own, and yet, beneath the fear, beneath the disgust, there was something else, something she hated herself for feeling. Attraction, not the kind born of affection, but of danger, of proximity to fire. His power terrified her, but it also pulled her closer, like gravity. His eyes, so cold and merciless, carried a glint of pain, of grief buried so deep it had hardened into ice. She wondered, against her will, what had broken him so badly. And for the first time she feared not just him, but herself, because some fragile part of her wanted to know. The night stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. Serena Carter, the girl who had walked onto a stage to sell her innocence, had stepped instead into a labyrinth of secrets, vengeance, and fire. Damian Blackwood had bought her, but what he truly owned now was her future. The scandal was only the beginning. The real story, the one that would tear apart families, ignite forbidden love, and test the limits of survival, was just beginning to unfold. And the truth behind it, hidden in the shadows of two broken souls, was far darker than anyone could ever imagine. Serena Carter's story did not begin on the glittering stage of that cursed auction. It began in a world far removed from chandeliers and velvet curtains. She grew up in a neighborhood where opportunity was a rumor and hope was a fragile thread that snapped too easily. Her childhood home was small, its paint peeling from years of neglect, its walls echoing with the kind of silence that comes from constant struggle. Her mother worked tirelessly, even as sickness gnawed at her body, while her father had long since disappeared from their lives, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and unanswered questions. Serena learned young that life was not fair, that the world did not pause for the broken or the poor. By the time she was a teenager, she had become both daughter and caretaker, juggling part-time jobs, slipping through school exhausted, and carrying a weight far too heavy for her narrow shoulders. Her mother's illness worsened as the years dragged on. The woman who had once been vibrant and full of laughter became a shadow, tethered to hospital machines that beeped and blinked with cruel indifference. Every visit to the doctor carried new words Serena barely understood: terminal, progressive, experimental treatment, and every word carried a price tag that grew larger and more impossible. The bills piled higher each month, a mountain she could not climb no matter how many hours she worked at the art gallery, no matter how many corners she cut from her own life. Nights became endless cycles of calculation. What could she sell? What could she delay? What could she sacrifice just to buy her mother another week, another month, another fragile chance? Desperation carved itself into her skin like a brand. She was not reckless or weak. She was a survivor forced to make impossible choices. She dreamed sometimes, in fleeting moments, of a life beyond survival. Serena had always loved art, the way a brushstroke could capture an entire lifetime, the way a sculpture could make silence feel alive. She worked in a gallery, not because it paid well, but because it gave her a window into a world she longed to belong to. Yet every painting she hung, every piece she catalogued, was a reminder of a life out of reach. Wealthy patrons would stroll past her without a glance, their wallets bulging with the kind of money that could save her mother 10 times over. She was invisible to them, a girl behind a desk, a shadow in the corner. It stung, but it also fueled her resolve. She told herself she would do anything, if it meant keeping her mother alive. And eventually she did. If Serena was a girl forged in fire, Damian Blackwood was the storm that fire feared. He was the heir to an empire built on ambition and sharpened by betrayal. The Blackwood name had once been synonymous with power, wealth, and legacy. But beneath the polished surface, the family tree was rotten. Damien had grown up watching his father's empire torn apart by treachery, stolen by those who had once called themselves allies. The betrayal left scars no money could heal. As a boy, he saw trust destroyed, loyalty twisted into a weapon. And from those ashes, he built himself into something unbreakable. By the time he was 25, he had clawed his way into the position of CEO, turning his family's ruins into a fortress of steel and glass. His methods were ruthless, his victories absolute. He learned to see people as tools or threats, nothing more. Compassion had no place in his vocabulary. Yet, for all his wealth and power, Damien carried wounds deeper than any boardroom rivalry. Behind the headlines of hostile takeovers and scandalous deals lay a man haunted by shadows. He wore his coldness like armor, a shield against the vulnerability he could never allow himself to show. Rumors swirled about him, about the icy blue stare that could freeze an entire boardroom, about the sharpness of his tongue, about the rare, fleeting glimpses of pain that slipped through when he thought no one was watching. Women adored him, feared him, envied those who caught his attention, but none truly touched him. To them, he was the untouchable billionaire, a myth in flesh. To himself, he was a soldier waging an endless war against the past. What made Damien most dangerous was not his money nor his influence, but his obsession. He was consumed by the desire to uncover the truth behind his family's downfall. Somewhere, buried in the rubble of betrayal, was a name, a thread, a secret that explained everything. And when his investigators brought him whispers of a girl, Serena Carter, whose bloodline traced back to that old ruin, his interest sharpened. She was not just a woman, she was a key, a piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve for years. When Damien walked into the auction hall that night, he did not come seeking pleasure. He came for her. To the men around him, Serena was just another pretty face, another fleeting indulgence. But to Damien, she was leverage, a bridge to the truth he had hunted for so long. He knew her name before the gavel fell, knew her story, knew the desperation that had driven her to such a place. And while others saw a victim, he saw an opportunity. That cold calculation was what set him apart. He did not buy her body. He bought her future. He bought the blood in her veins, the secrets tied to her father, the chance to finally tear open the wound that had never healed. Serena, of course, did not know this. To her, Damien was terror embodied, a predator cloaked in wealth and power. His gaze unsettled her. His silence pressed against her chest, like a weight she could not bear. She thought she was selling herself for her mother's survival, but what she was really doing was stepping into the center of Damien's labyrinth. She would come to learn that nothing about him was accidental, that every word, every look, every move was part of a larger game she did not yet understand. Still, beneath the steel and vengeance, there lingered something Damien himself could not fully deny. When he looked at her, trembling but defiant, desperate but unbroken, he saw more than a pawn. He saw a reflection of himself, the survivor, the fighter, the one who refused to surrender even when the world demanded it. It was that glimmer, that dangerous spark, that would undo them both, because for all his coldness, Damien was still human, and for all her fear, Serena was still capable of love. The world around them did not care about their struggles. To society, Damien was the ruthless billionaire, and Serena the scandal-ridden girl who had sold her innocence. But beneath the surface, Their stories were intertwined, two broken paths converging. One carried by poverty and sacrifice, the other by power and vengeance. And together they would ignite a fire that could either destroy them or save them. Serena's nights in those days before the auction were restless, filled with dreams of her mother's laughter and nightmares of losing her forever. Damien's nights were equally haunted, though his demons wore different faces. Boardroom rivals, old enemies, the ghost of his father's legacy. Neither of them imagined that their fates were rushing toward collision, that the choices made in desperation and in vengeance would bind them in ways neither could escape. And so, when the auctioneer's voice echoed Serena's name across the hall, and when Damien raised his hand without hesitation, history itself shivered. She thought she was stepping into one night of shame. He knew she was stepping into a lifetime of secrets. She believed she was sacrificing herself to save her mother. He believed he was reclaiming his family's honor. Neither realized that what they were truly stepping into was each other. The hall still echoed in Serena's ears long after the gavel fell. She had expected the night to end with shame, perhaps humiliation, but not with the icy weight of a name that froze her blood: Damien Blackwood. His very presence seemed to drain the air from the room. When he moved, the crowd parted as though afraid to brush against him. He carried no smile, no hint of victory, only the cold precision of a man who had acquired exactly what he came for. Serena tried to steady her breathing as he approached, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. This was not a man who looked at her like the others did, not with leering hunger or drunken entitlement. He looked at her like she was a cipher, something to be decoded, a piece of a puzzle he had already solved in his mind, and that terrified her more than anything else. The auctioneer dismissed the crowd with a flourish, but the whispers lingered, sharp and cutting. Men shifted uneasily in their seats, some smirking, others frowning, but all aware that the game had shifted the moment Damien's name entered the air. He reached her with a few measured steps, towering, immovable, his gaze locked on hers. "Shall we?" he said, his voice low, steady, commanding. It was not a question. She nodded, because what else could she do? His hand, strong and unyielding, closed around hers. The touch was not tender, it was ownership. He led her down the velvet-lined corridor, past guards who did not dare meet his eyes, past mirrors that reflected her pale, frightened face beside his controlled, unreadable mask. Serena's mind screamed at her to run, to wrench her hand away and flee into the night, but her body would not move. Fear had rooted her, and something else, a strange, magnetic pull she hated herself for feeling. When they entered the private room, she swallowed a gasp. It was not the lavish bedroom she expected, not a chamber designed for seduction. It was austere, almost clinical. The walls were painted a slate grey, the furniture sleek and minimal, a table in the corner stacked with files. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like an interrogation room. Damien released her hand, his presence filling the silence. She tried to steady her breath. "This was supposed to be one night," she whispered, her voice shaking. He studied her for a long moment before replying, "Nothing about this is one night." She frowned, confused. "I don't understand. I thought—" Her words faltered under the weight of his stare. His eyes, glacial blue, seemed to cut straight through her defenses. "You thought this was about your body," he said evenly. It's not. I don't buy toys. I buy truth. The statement left her cold. What truth? She demanded, though her voice cracked. He stepped closer, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his gaze. Not lust, not desire, but calculation. You'll learn soon enough, he murmured. The tension thickened, the silence pressing down until it was unbearable. Serena forced herself to speak again, desperate to regain control. I agreed to a transaction. That's all. You don't own me beyond tonight. Damien's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper, something dangerous. That's where you're wrong. From the moment you stepped on that stage, your fate was mine. You think you can walk away? You can't. Not from me. Not from this. His words struck like iron bars closing around her. She felt the room tilt, her chest tightening with panic. Her instinct screamed for escape. She turned toward the door, her hand trembling as it reached for the handle, but before she could pull it open, his voice stopped her. Run if you want. You won't make it 2 steps. She froze, anger sparking through the fear. You can't keep me here, she hissed. Watch me, he replied calmly. His certainty, his absolute control, infuriated her. For a moment, defiance flared in her eyes, and she turned to face him fully. I am not your pawn, she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to carry conviction. Damien tilted his head, studying her as if she were an unpredictable equation. No, he admitted softly, almost to himself. You're not a pawn. You're the key. The words unsettled her more than threats ever could. She wanted to demand answers, but his gaze held her in place, and the silence stretched until it felt like the room itself was collapsing around them. In that instant, their eyes locked, and something shifted. It was not gentle, not romantic. It was violent in its intensity, like 2 storms colliding. Serena's breath caught, her pulse thundering. She hated him. His arrogance, his control, the way he reduced her to a piece in his game. And yet, beneath the fury, a dangerous spark ignited. His gaze, for all its cruelty, held something raw, something fractured. She recognized it because she carried the same fracture within herself. The mark of loss, of desperation, of fighting against a world determined to crush you. The fire between them scared her more than his threats. It was a fire that whispered promises she dared not believe. Desire twisted with fear, attraction with hatred. She tore her gaze away, forcing air back into her lungs, desperate to remind herself of who she was and why she was there. This was not love. This was not safety. This was survival. Yet even as she told herself that, the truth clawed at her. Something irreversible had begun the moment their eyes met. Damien finally broke the silence, his tone softer but no less commanding. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we begin. Serena's brow furrowed. Begin what? His expression remained unreadable. The truth. The past. Everything your family has hidden. You will help me uncover it. Her chest tightened, the words echoing like a curse. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice rising. He didn't flinch. You will. She felt her knees weaken, her mind spinning with terror and confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had come for money, for survival. Instead, She had walked into a labyrinth with no way out. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself, her mind screaming at her to resist. But when Damien stepped closer, his hand brushing hers just briefly, electricity surged through her veins. She jerked back, horrified by her own reaction. He saw it, the flicker of something in her eyes, and for the first time his mask cracked. A shadow of vulnerability crossed his face, gone almost instantly, but it was enough. Serena realized then that the danger was not only in what he demanded of her. The danger was in what she might give willingly. Outside, the city hummed with indifference, cars rushing past, lights flickering in distant towers. Inside, the room had become a battlefield. She was a prisoner, yet not in chains. He was a captor, yet not without scars. Between them lay a fire that could consume or save. And as the night stretched long and heavy, one truth settled deep into Serena's bones. Her life was no longer her own. Damien Blackwood had bought more than her innocence. He had bought her fate. And though she did not want to admit it, though she tried to bury the thought deep, she knew she was already bound to him in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or money. She closed her eyes, fighting tears, whispering to herself that she could endure this, that she would find a way out. But when she opened them again, Damien was still there, watching, his gaze unreadable, and in that gaze burned the beginning of something neither of them could stop. The days that followed were a blur of silence and shadows. Serena had thought her greatest shame was standing on that stage, but she soon realized her true torment was living under Damien's watchful eye. He did not treat her like a lover or even a companion. He treated her like a piece of evidence, something to be studied, guarded, and eventually used. Every room she entered in his penthouse carried his presence, even when he wasn't there. The city outside glittered with wealth, but inside she felt like a prisoner. Each night she lay awake listening to the steady hum of the air conditioning, wondering when the mask would drop, when he would reveal why he had truly bought her. And one night he did. She had wandered into his office, desperate for air, when her eyes fell on a stack of files left carelessly open on the desk. Curiosity pushed past fear, and she reached for them. The name on the page froze her blood. George Carter, her father. A man she had not seen in years, a man whose absence was a wound she had long since buried. But here, in Damien's files, her father's name was surrounded by words she could hardly believe. Fraud, betrayal, conspiracy. She staggered back, clutching the paper as if it might burn her. "What is this?" she whispered when Damien's shadow fell across the room. His gaze was cold, but not surprised. "The truth," he said. "Your father was one of the men who destroyed my family. You were never random, Serena. You were always part of this." Her knees buckled, rage and disbelief colliding in her chest. "You're lying. He left us. He had nothing. How could he destroy you?" Damien stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "Because he sold us out. My father trusted him, and he took everything." His words landed like blows. The ground beneath Serena shifted, the world tilting as the man she despised, her absent father, was suddenly tied to the ruin of the man who now held her captive. She wanted to deny it, to scream, but the papers in her hands spoke louder than her heart. The revelation tore something open inside her. She felt sick, caught between loyalty to a family that had already abandoned her and the sharp truth of Damien's pain. For the first time she saw not the ruthless billionaire, but the boy he had once been, the boy who had watched his father's empire crumble, the boy who had learned that trust was a weapon. His cruelty, his obsession, his control. It was born of grief. That understanding should have made her hate him less. Instead, it drew her deeper into his storm. But the storm was larger than the two of them. Enemies circled, their fangs bared. Victor Langley emerged first, a rival businessman with a smile as sharp as glass. He cornered Serena one afternoon while Damien was away, his words dripping with venomous charm. "You think you're special to him," Victor sneered. "You're just another pawn. He'll use you until you're empty, then discard you like the rest." His hand brushed her arm, and she jerked away, fury igniting in her chest. Yet his words lingered. Wasn't that exactly what Damien had admitted? That she was leverage? Still, when Damien returned and saw the shaken look in her eyes, something flared in his expression. Anger, yes, but also something dangerously close to protectiveness. He ordered Victor out, his voice like thunder, and for the first time Serena wondered if she meant more to him than he wanted to admit. Then came Victoria. She was everything Serena was not, elegant, powerful, perfectly matched to Damien in the eyes of the world. Once promised to him, she now watched Serena with burning hatred. "You don't belong here," she hissed during their first encounter. "You're nothing but a mistake he'll regret." Her words were knives, but Serena stood her ground. "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But at least I'm not living off his shadow." Victoria's eyes narrowed, venomous, and Serena knew she had made a dangerous enemy. And then there was James Montclair, the ghost from Damien's past. His arrival shifted everything, for he carried not only power, but knowledge. He revealed truths Serena had never imagined, that her mother, too, was entwined with the Blackwood family's downfall, that the betrayal ran deeper than her father's sins. "Your bloodline," James told her with a chilling calm, "was always meant to be part of this war. You are not an accident. You are the consequence." The weight of it all pressed down until Serena could hardly breathe. She wanted to escape, to run as far from Damien and his enemies as she could, but something rooted her in place. It wasn't the contracts or the guards, it was him. For every cruel word he spoke, there was a glance that betrayed vulnerability. For every command, there was a moment of hesitation, as if he were fighting himself. And against her will, against her reason, she began to see the man behind the monster. One night, after a confrontation with Victor that nearly turned violent, Damien returned to her shaken. His hands trembled as he poured a glass of whiskey, his facade cracking just enough for her to glimpse the depth of his scars. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rough. "I can't stop. I have to finish this. If I don't, then everything they took, everything they destroyed, it will mean nothing." Serena stepped closer, her heart pounding. "And if you destroy yourself in the process, what then?" His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat the world held still. "Then at least I'll go down knowing I fought," he murmured. It was then she realized the truth. Damien was not evil. He was broken. And brokenness, she knew too well, had its own gravity. Still, the world outside their fragile connection grew more dangerous by the day. Files vanished. Threats arrived. One evening, Serena returned to the penthouse to find a message scrawled across the mirror in red. "He will never choose you." Her blood ran cold. Whether it was Victor, Victoria, or James, she didn't know. But the war had crossed the threshold of their sanctuary. No place was safe. The tension between her and Damien reached its peak in a confrontation that shook them both. "You used me," she accused, her voice raw. "You bought me like an object, tied me to your vengeance, and now I don't even know who I am anymore." Damien's face hardened, but his eyes betrayed anguish. "I didn't plan this," he shot back. "I didn't plan you. You think I wanted to feel this?" His words hung heavy, unspoken confessions lacing every syllable. She stared at him, chest heaving, and whispered, "Then what are we, Damien? What am I to you?" He stepped closer, his breath mingling with hers, his hand trembling as it reached for her cheek. "You're the one thing I can't control," he said. The kiss that followed was not gentle. It was fire and fury, need and despair, a collision of souls torn between hate and desire. It left her shaking, not because it was wrong, but because it felt inevitable. Their love, if it could be called that, was born in shadows, tangled with betrayal, fueled by wounds neither could heal. It was dangerous, destructive, impossible. And yet, it was real. Serena knew it in the way her heart betrayed her every time his eyes softened, in the way his voice lowered when he said her name. Damien knew it in the way his armor cracked whenever she defied him, in the way he wanted to protect her, even as he told himself she was just a pawn. But the world would not allow their fragile bond to survive without blood. Victor struck again, orchestrating a kidnapping that left Serena bound in a warehouse, the air thick with menace. Damien fought through shadows to reach her, his fury unmatched, but the damage was done. She saw in his rage the truth he had tried to bury. He cared. He cared enough to burn the world to ash for her. By the time he carried her back to safety, her body trembling but alive, Serena understood the choice that lay before them both. They could continue down the path of vengeance, letting it consume them until nothing remained. Or they could defy the past, abandon the ghosts, and cling to the fragile, impossible love that had grown between them. As she lay in his arms, the question burned between them, unspoken but undeniable. Would they destroy each other in the fire of their bloodlines, or would they save each other from it? The answer had not yet come, but one truth was certain. Whatever lay ahead, they were bound. And in the eyes of the world, in the whispers of enemies, in the secrets that haunted every shadow, the bond between Serena Carter and Damien Blackwood was either their doom or their salvation. The night of reckoning arrived not with a whisper, but with a storm. Rain lashed against the broken windows of the old estate. Thunder groaned like a wounded beast, and the city beyond seemed to vanish beneath a curtain of darkness. Serena stood in the center of it all, her body trembling, her soul weighed down by truths too heavy to bear. The documents Damien had uncovered lay scattered at her feet, each page a dagger pointing back to her blood. Her father's signature, her mother's silence, the betrayals hidden in their name. It was all here, undeniable. And now Damien, the man who had once seemed untouchable, stood before her with a gun in his hand, his face torn between vengeance and something deeper. "You knew," he said, his voice low, raw, nearly broken. "All this time I thought the enemy was out there, but it was always closer. It was in your blood, Serena." Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look away. "I didn't choose my family," she whispered. "I didn't choose what he did. But I choose now. I choose to stand here with you." Damien's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the gun. His entire life had been a march toward this moment, toward vengeance, toward justice carved out of pain. But now that the chance stood before him, it was Serena's eyes that stopped him. They weren't the eyes of a traitor. They were the eyes of a woman who had given everything, who had risked everything just to survive. And for the first time, he wondered if his vengeance had blinded him to the truth he needed most. Outside, the storm howled louder, as though the world itself demanded blood. Inside, silence stretched between them, a silence so sharp it threatened to break them both. Finally, Damien lowered the gun, the weight of it crashing against the table like a final verdict. "If I kill you," he said, his voice rough, "then I become the very thing I swore to destroy." Serena's knees gave way, relief and sorrow colliding. She collapsed into a chair, her chest heaving with sobs she had held back for too long. Damien stepped closer, his hand trembling as he brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. For the first time, his touch was not possession. It was surrender. But their reprieve was short-lived. The door burst open, and Victor Langley's men stormed in, their guns raised, their faces hard with determination. Behind them, Victoria appeared, her eyes blazing with triumph. And then James Montclair stepped into the light, calm and composed, the puppet master revealing his stage. "You see," James said smoothly, "love makes fools of us all. You thought you could bury the past, Damien. You thought you could rewrite history with her by your side. But history has teeth, and it always comes back to bite." Damien positioned himself in front of Serena, his body a shield. "You want me," he growled. "Leave her out of this." James smirked. "Oh, but she is the heart of this. Without her, you are just a man with scars. With her, you are weak. That is why she must be destroyed." Serena's fear turned to fury. She rose to her feet, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're wrong. I'm not weak. I'm not a pawn. You think I'm just bloodlines and betrayal, but I'm more than the mistakes of the people who came before me, and I will not let you use me to break him." The room erupted into violence. Gunfire shattered the silence, the storm outside merging with the storm within. Damien fought with the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose, taking down Victor's men one by one. Serena ducked for cover, her heart pounding, until she found a discarded weapon and with trembling hands fired to protect the man who had once been her captor but had become something far more. The battle raged until only the three of them remained: Damien, Serena, and James. James sneered, blood staining his lips. "You think this ends with you two standing together? You think love can erase generations of hatred? You're both fools." Damien raised his weapon, his breath ragged. "Maybe we are, but at least we're fools together." And then the shot rang out. James crumpled, his rain of shadows extinguished. The room fell silent, save for the ragged breaths of Serena and Damien. The war was over, but its cost was carved deep into their souls. They stumbled out into the night, the storm finally breaking into a fragile dawn. The city skyline glowed in muted gold, as if mocking the chaos they had survived. Serena leaned against Damien, her body exhausted, her heart raw. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Damien looked at her, his eyes no longer just cold steel, but something warmer, though still uncertain. "Now?" He paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Now we see if love can be more than a prison, or if it was always just another cage." Serena swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking deep. She wanted to believe in freedom, in salvation, in the possibility that their love, born in shadows, tested by fire, could be real. But doubt lingered, gnawing at her. Could they ever escape the bloodlines that bound them? Could they ever be more than the sins of their families? As they walked into the rising sun, hand in hand, the question remained unanswered. Their love was fragile, unsteady, but alive. Perhaps it was their salvation. Perhaps it was their doom. And that is where their story leaves us, not with certainty, but with a haunting truth. Love is both the sweetest freedom and the cruelest prison. Which it becomes depends not on fate, but on the choices made in the silence after the storm. So I ask you, as witness to their journey, what do you believe? Can love truly conquer the shadows of betrayal, or will it always collapse under the weight of the past? If you want to see where their path leads, if you believe their fight is not yet over, then don't let the story end here. Press like, subscribe, and share this tale with those who still believe in love's impossible power. Because whether their love becomes a cage or a key, one truth is certain: their fight has only just begun.